The story that keeps on giving, college football realignment rumors. We've got some more updates for you guys. But before we get to all that, I just want to get the pulse of everyone watching and ask, are you a fan of the recent realignment moves? Part of me can't wait to see Oregon and Wisconsin play at Camp Randall in November. But part of me also loves the pageantry, the traditions, the rivalries of college football. And those take a blow with all these recent moves. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Welcome into College Football Now by Chat Sports. Matthew Peterson here, breaking down the latest college football realignment rumors as the Big 12 might be the Big 20 at this rate for all the recent additions they have made, and they might not be over with. So Jason Scheer, who is a reporter that covers Arizona football and basketball, tweeted out, hearing Oregon State and San Diego State have had very preliminary talks with the Big 12 over the last 48 hours. Keyword is preliminary, and it would be at a discounted rate. So what they mean by that is they're not going to get the big pool of cash that maybe some other schools are seeing for the move, but Oregon State and San Diego State. Now, we've heard some buzz about SDSU trying to get out of the Mountain West to join the Pac-12. That didn't work out. But Oregon State is one of the four remaining lone survivors, if you will, of the current Pac-12 landscape. So no surprise that they are trying to do what's in their best interest and run for the hills and try and join their, the Big 12 wagon and stay afloat past this year. Because if you need a reminder, here's how the current college football landscape looks at the moment. Going into 2023 and 2024, here are the current Big 12 schools. You got your usual Baylor guys, but also BYU, Cincinnati, Houston. They will be in the Big 12 this year as well. Then you have some other usual schools, but the additions did not end there. You also have the UCF Knights coming over. This is also the last year with Texas and Oklahoma. So in 2024, which will be a year and like a month from now, when that season kicks off in 13 months, you will have the Arizonas, Arizona State, and the Arizona Wildcats, along with this year's additions of BYU, Cincinnati. Colorado comes over, Houston as well. And then you have your usual Big 12 schools like Iowa State, Kansas, K-State, all that good stuff. But you also lose Texas and Oklahoma, but you continue growing with UCF coming over this year and Utah coming over next year. So by my count, we're up to, 14, 16 Big 12 schools. I doubt they ever change the name Big 12, but it is way past that number. But just a moment here, what a comeback for the Big 12. Like, there was a point in time a year ago or so when Texas and Oklahoma announced they are leaving for the SEC, and the Big 12, which was just 10 schools at the time, was about to be the Big 8, and it looked like it might be a group of 5 school, but at the same time, they had some still big heavy hitters in that conference, but they were able to bounce back, and they have able to double the size of their conference from what they were looking at being. And I wonder if fans of Big 12 schools would prefer the current Big 12 landscape going into 2024 with all these Pac-12 schools coming over and the group of 5 schools as well, or would they rather go back in time and keep it at the current 10 schools it had going into this past season? But I want to show you guys a quick quote from Scott Barnes. He's the Oregon State athletic director, and this is what he said after the mass exodus of the Pac-12. The great history and tradition of this conference has been severely damaged. The best interest of the student athlete hasn't been served. Traveling to the Eastern Seaboard multiple times a year is not in the best interest of student athletes. I'm furious because it puts this university in harm's way and our student athletes in harm's way. There's some damage that we're going to have to mitigate. This is why the Pac-12 is dying. 3 times in that quote, Scott Barnes said, student athletes. Let's call it what it is. They're not student athletes anymore. Sure, the water polo team might be student athletes, but the guys signing huge NIL deals that will be bigger money than what they get their first year in the NFL or the NBA, they're not there to play school. And the fact that the Pac-12 still doesn't see that, I think is why they are dying. Because the rest of the college football landscape understood that. There's a reason why players aren't staying in college all 4 years for football and basketball. Because they're not going to these schools to get a diploma. They're going to these schools because it's the best chance they have to go play professional football or basketball. That is the reason why the Pac-12 is dying. There's still a bunch of nerds that still think it's student athletes. And the rest of the country has caught on to, sure, we can call them student athletes, but these guys are not student athletes. These guys are here for a year, 2, 3, maybe, and then they are on their way to the pros, and we are just a stopping ground, right? And the fact that Pac-12 still believes that these poor student athletes, that's why there's only 4 schools left, because USC, Oregon, Washington was tired of being the worst of the big Power 5 conferences because half of their conference was still playing school. And the SEC and the Big 10 and the Big 12 were out there playing football, right? We're out there playing sports and prioritizing it. Meanwhile, Stanford and Cal, they didn't really care about it all that much. Go look at the attendance of some of those early games on Saturday for Stanford at Cal, like a noon kickoff or whatever. That's why those other schools in the Big 12, the ones I just mentioned, Oregon, USC, UCLA, were tired of being dragged down and said, you know what, screw it. If those guys aren't going to make us money because those schools aren't driving a whole bunch of revenue in, and they are not prioritizing athletics like the other big conferences are, well, then let's just go join them. Because right now, we are sinking slowly, but nevertheless, we are sinking, and it's not because USC and Arizona State aren't doing enough. It's because some of those big Pac-12 schools were prioritizing student athletes when that's just not the way college football is anymore. I know for a good chunk of guys it is. There are a lot. I mean, the NCAA loves to run those commercials of 97% will never go to the pros. But you know what? The 3% that do go to the pros, they're the ones putting seats and butts at college football games. They're the ones paying bills for these athletic directors. So the sooner those schools caught on that maybe we should prioritize athletics a little bit more and not let some stupid Apple TV, Pac-12 football television deal get in the way, they would have stuck around a little bit longer. Now, to wrap up more of the recent realignment moves and whatnot, next year in the Big Ten, here's what the landscape looks like. You have your current usual Big Ten schools of Illinois, Indiana, all that good stuff. But then you get the Pac-12 crossover, right? With Oregon coming over and UCLA and USC and Washington. So the Big Ten is also way past the number 10, which they have been for over a decade at this point, right? Almost whenever I think it was Nebraska and Maryland and Rutgers joining in 2012, 2011, sometime in that range. And then that leaves these schools, right? 2024, 2025, Cal, Oregon State, Stanford, and Washington State for next season, 2024 and 2025, the lone 4 schools of the Pac-12, with everyone else leaving for the Big 12 or the Big 10, because I believe it's because these schools, some of them were still playing school, and some of them were just not bringing enough money, and they were the ugly ones. They were the leftovers. They were the ones that were sticking out, and they were not putting seats and butts at their games. I mean, no offense to Oregon State and Washington State, because those schools are, I believe, good fan bases, and I feel bad for them because I feel like they're the ones that got kind of screwed over the most, because Cal and Stanford didn't really seem like they cared about football or basketball that much anymore, but I couldn't say the same for Oregon State and Washington State. I feel like they're the true losers of these recent moves because it wasn't through any actions of their own. It was just they weren't a big enough name or ticket for the Big 12 to come hunting for them. But let's show the Pac-12 some love. Let's type RIP. That may not be the best phrasing, but let's at least acknowledge that the Pac-12, and I'm going to tell you why, I think is dead at this point, and the Pac-12 is not going to be the Pac-12 we have all remembered for years to come. Now, Ross Dellinger, who covers college football for Yahoo Sports, he also tweeted this out earlier this week saying, presidents and ADs from the remaining 4 Pac-12 schools have held multiple meetings today to discuss next steps. Options are limited, but one of the most practical is a merger or partnership with the Mountain West, which the Mountain West is receptive to, sources tell Yahoo Sports. If the Big 12 prom group is getting too big and they are at a max capacity, then I could see the Mountain West inevitably merging or forming some kind of partnership with the Pac-12. This is not going to be the Mountain West schools going, oh, there's a bunch of open seats at the Pac-12 table. Let's all leave the Mountain West for the Pac-12. One, there's a buyout, and it's a very expensive buyout to the tune of about $34 million that schools like San Jose State and Wyoming are just not going to pay. I think they have the actual opposite effect where they can go, hey, the Pac-12, how about you join us? And maybe we form the Pac-West or something like that. But I don't know if the Big 12 has a number in the line in the sand where they go, we don't want to get bigger than this number and we're now at max capacity, or we just don't see the value of adding Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, or Washington State. We like all the additions we've made and we want to stay put. I don't know. I don't think really anyone knows because all this continues to be new and developing information every single day. But inevitably, I think you're going to see the 4 Pac-12 schools in a conference with the current 11 Mountain West schools. And under what name, I'm not quite sure, but I don't think it's going to be called the Pac-12 anymore. I don't think you're going to see all 11 Mountain West schools go over to the Pac-12. So with that being said, we're going to look at what that merger could look like. But make sure you subscribe. Here at Chat Sports, we cover all things NFL, NBA, college football, any breaking news under the sun related to sports. We're going to keep you guys informed and entertained. So join over 342,000 subscribers here at Chat Sports. I put together a rough idea of what a potential Mountain West could look like with a merger. And you can call it something else. You can call it the Pac West or Mountain 12. I don't care. But Air Force, Boise State, Cal, Colorado State, Fresno State, New Mexico State, and then you have Nevada, Oregon State, San Diego State, San Jose, Stanford, Utah State, UNLV, Washington State, and Wyoming. So that would include the 4 current Pac-12 schools, and that would get them over 12 at that point. So I think the remaining 4 Pac-12 schools merge with the Mountain West, and the Pac-12 dies. It's sad to see, but I don't think you're going to see a big run of Mountain West schools trying to join the Pac-12. You're definitely not seeing schools like SMU, which at one point thought they were sitting pretty. They were going to leave the American Athletic Conference and go on over to the Pac-12 and start punching up their weight class a little bit. All of a sudden, SMU sitting there like, the last thing we want to do is hop on that boat that's on fire that's called the Pac-12 and be the 5th school in that conference in 2 years from now. So a year from now. So with that said, I think you're going to see some kind of merger and maybe a whole new division name and conference name and everything. And the Pac-12, as we have known it for a century or so, ceases to exist. And it's sad to see, and it's a bummer because at the end of the day, a lot of this was prioritized by revenue and money. And there are some losers like the girls basketball team that's not generating as much money as college football programs, and the water polo team, and all those other second and third tier sports that now have to either travel across conference, or the conference they join has been diminished and it's not as valuable as it once was. But football runs the world, right? Football runs this country. There's nothing bigger than football in America. So for that reason, I think you're going to see Pac-12 merge with the Mountain West and try and keep themselves afloat. Before we get on out of here, shout out your college, though. Let me know where you went to school, which school you root for on Saturday in the comment section below. I know that some schools are having some bleak times at the moment, but maybe you're on the other side of the fence and grass is pretty green. Let me know down below in the comment section, and make sure to subscribe one more time. If you got all the way to the end of the video, I like to believe that we're doing something here right at Chat Sports. So like the video, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. We'll see everyone later.